Hello, good afternoon. Today our guest is David Labrie. David, hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Yeah, I'm
Thank
doing
you.
great, David. So obviously our audience would not have known this, but I'm very personable when doing interviews. Prior to starting this interview, you must give a problem. This is why I sound so elated. Yes, so we can get on with the business of the interview. So, David, we're going to be talking about the European marriage pattern and a paper you did on kinship intensity and innovation. But we will begin with the former paper first. David, what is the European marriage pattern?
Oh, that's a big issue. This European marriage pattern has been introduced by a social scientist, Hajnal, a few decades ago. And it remains unclear because he mentioned several things, especially the fact that in Western Europe, you have specific characteristics of families. The nuclear family first, a late female age at marriage, and also a high prevalence of permanent celibacy. But this first introduction of this concept of European marriage pattern has created a lot of debates because after Rajnal, several research have shown that it is not so clear. You have some families in some areas in Europe that are not nuclears. You have not always a late female age at marriage. So in this paper, I try with my co-author to clarify what is this concept of European marriage pattern. And we study a specific place in southern France to try to identify the characteristics of this marriage patterns and the consequences, especially the consequences for the economic development. If I want to say more on that, we clarify the fact that you don't need to have a nuclear family to have a European marriage pattern, because the place we study is characterized by a stem family and not a nuclear family. The stem family is the case in which you have one child that remains at the parental household, living there with his spouse. Most of the time, it's the eldest son that remains there, and other child can remain at the parental household, but are not allowed to marry there. If they want to marry, they have to move out. Uh, and uh, and we clarify also the economic consequences of this specific case of family organization. We test the impact of this family organization, and we test in particular three impacts. The first one is on the female age at marriage. That was mentioned by Ajnal to be a characteristic, a late female age at marriage, but we accept the idea that it's not a characteristic. It's a characteristic only if the economic conditions are bad. In this case, you have a delayed marriage, delayed female age at marriage. We also investigate the second consequence, which is a reduced number of child, because if you have a late female age at marriage, you will have a reduced number of child. We also investigate a second consequences, which is the impact on human capital, because from a theoretical point of view, with a late female age at marriage, you could have more time for female to invest in their own human capital, and then the mother will be able to transmit more human capital. And that's a lot of tests we already try to do in this paper. I
Is
hope I'm clear. I'm not
Yeah, yeah,
sure,
yeah.
but
You are clear. I am listening. People prefer it when the interviewer speaks less. Is the European marriage pattern linked to female agency?
yes, it is, because one characteristic of the uh, family models we observe in Europe is that you have a high female woman status, and especially a high wife status compared to other family models outside Western Europe. And uh, uh, another characteristic, another aspect of the female agency we introduce in this paper is that we also have a potential higher female agency within her couple when you have bad economic conditions and thus a late female age at marriage, because when you have these bad economic conditions, you would have a late female age at marriage, but the male age at marriage is not affected by this bad economic conditions. So as a consequence, you have a reduced gender age gap, and this gender age gap is a good indication of the female agency within her couple. So to sum up, you always have a relatively high female agency in Western Europe, but when the economic conditions are bad, you have a reduced gender age gap, so a higher female agency within her couple.
And David, is there a relationship between the European marriage pattern and the child quantity quality trade-off?
Yeah, because if indeed you have this delayed female age at marriage when economic conditions are bad, you have mechanical consequences. It's a reduced number of children, because if a woman starts to be a mother later, she will be able to have a reduced number of child. So in this potential trade-off between quality and quantity, you will favor quality at the expense of quantity, because a woman will bear a reduced number of child. But here again, it's only when you have these bad economic conditions that lead to a late female age at marriage. If you have the same population enjoying better economic conditions, you observe an early female marriage, so you don't have this effect on the child quality versus quantity trade-off.
David, during periods of economic crises or recessions, were women more likely to work?
I don't know.
Based on your paper,
For,
it is within the context of your paper.
yeah. It's for sure. We can expect this kind of effect. We show that in our context. Maybe we can also observe that in the general context of France, because if you look at the female age at marriage in France, the level was around the age was around the 26 or 27 at the end of the 20th century, and then you observed a gradual decrease until just after the Second World War. And at this time, the economic conditions were very good. And we know that at this time, a lot of women remains at home, while previously women had to work to provide enough resources for the household. So yes, there is probably this effect of the economic conditions on the women's work.
And David, I'm also wondering, The European marriage pattern, it led to a greater participation of women in the labor force. So I often ponder, did the greater participation of women in the labor force also, in a sense, drove the consumer revolution? In the
Yes, yeah.
Because if women are working, it means that they now have money to purchase goods and services.
Yeah, what is difficult to observe or to define is this idea of labor force, because it's an efficient concept in an area or a period during which you have a market for labor, which is typically the case when you have a lot of employees and so on. But in many European areas in the past, you don't really have a market for labor, because you have many family farms or family craft shops, and of course, women had to work for this family business, but it's difficult to observe clearly participation in the labor market, as you can observe when you have employees.
And David, this question is also related to the European marriage pattern. I don't know if there is a paper on the topic, but if you know, then you can comment. But is there a relationship between the European marriage pattern and gender equality in contemporary societies? If the paper does not exist, this would be a good research topic.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I'm not sure if the paper exists, but here again, what we can observe is that for a long period of time, you have a relatively high status for women in Western Europe, and maybe that's part of the European marriage pattern, and probably. And I repeat myself, but we introduced the idea that you also have an effect of the economic conditions on the gender status compared to the between wife and husband. So you could have the two. You have the two relationships. It's general high level women status in Western Europe, and within her couple, an effect of the economic conditions on the women agency within her couple.
David, shed some light on the region in France that you studied. Like the name MV. You refer to this region as MV.
Yeah, it's Montesquieu-Volvest, so it's a small town in southern France, close to the Pyrenees. And this area is very different from what we know in northern France or in England, because in this area you have a STEM family and not a nuclear family as in England or in northern France. In the nuclear family, you have children that move out of parental household quickly after reaching adulthood, which is not the case in Montesquieu-Volvest. You also have specific institutions. You have, for instance, the woman law, which is the rule there. And one interesting characteristic of this legal regime is that you have to write many things, in particular the marriage contract. So in this area, you have a contract for almost all marriages. So we use that to provide, to obtain detailed information on the wealth at marriage of each couple. So it's very useful information to study the effect of the economic conditions on the behavior and the consequences of these marriages.
David,
And what yeah,
yeah,
just
yeah, yeah. So let me
another
continue.
yeah.
So David, some contend that capitalism is a consequence of the nuclear family, in that the nuclear family supports a capitalist structure. Could you please explain this link? Why would the nuclear family have an advantage over the extended family in terms of facilitating market transactions?
Yeah, the idea is that when you have an extended family, you can cooperate within your family. So you can achieve many projects without a foreigner, without people outside from the family. While in the case of an area in which the nuclear family is the dominant model, you have individuals free of family links, and they have to cooperate to achieve this project. So it's probably a first step toward an form of capitalism, even if it's not fully true, because if depends on the definition of capitalism. But if you accept the idea that capitalism is a system in which you have one owner of capital that obtains some revenues without working with this capital, you can observe capitalism very early. For instance, in Babylon, in Hammurabi Code, you have several articles explaining the cooperations between owners of capitals and traveling merchants. So it's maybe a first form of capitalism. And in this Hammurabi Code, you also observe that the family model is probably closer to a STEM families and to a nuclear family at this time. So for sure, the nuclear family supports these large corporations you need for capitalists to really develop. But already with a STEM family, you can have forms of capitalism.
And moreover, the nuclear family encourages mobility. So, David, please tell us that during the era of the European marriage pattern, both men and women would often migrate from their communities to work for other people, therefore acquiring new networks and developing better skills. So the nuclear family facilitates widespread mobility, whereas in the extended family, people are embedded in kinship structures.
Yeah. It's in the nuclear family, it's a norm to move out. So why not to go far from your parental household? So it's a very efficient family system to for colonization. And maybe we can explain the success of the English people across the earth thanks to this family model. And while for sure in a STEM family or in a communitarian family, the communitarian family is the family in which all sons are allowed to marry and to live with his spouse in the parental household. Of course, in this kind of family system, the norm is to remain close to your parental household and or even living with your parents. So it's more difficult for you to accept the idea to move out and eventually to grasp opportunities and so on, because you have to remain at your parental household.
David, we are treading on interesting waters, and I think that after this conversation, you're going to feel compelled to do a study on the link between EPM and innovation. Because the EPM permitted migration, in the long term, it would have selected for openness to new ideas.
Yeah, but if you want to study the effect on innovation, what I observed and try to test is the idea that the STEM family or the communitarian family is better to increase your human capital, because your parents are able to transmit their own human capital for a longer period of time. So you observe that the best place for human capital are not the nuclear families areas, but more probably the STEM family areas. Like for instance, Germany. It's in Germany that you observe very early high literacy rate. It's also the case in Scotland. In Scotland, you also have a STEM family, and Scottish universities and are famous for their early uh, achievements, starting with Adam Smith for economics. And even in France, within France, you observe an early high literacy rate in southern and southwest France, this area in which you have this STEM family model. So the nuclear family is better to move out and to grasp opportunities and to be open to foreign exchange. But the STEM family is better to improve your human capital because of this longer transmission from your parents.
The nuclear studying the nuclear family in Western history is a daunting and at the same time captivating task. Based on what I have been reading, the nuclear family promotes widespread generalized trust, and impersonal trust is responsible for large scale collaborations. And eventually, we're going to talk about your paper. So I would love to see more studies looking at the linkages between the nuclear family, kinship intensity, and innovation. I know that there's a paper on kinship intensity and impersonal trust by Energy and co-authors.
Yeah. Here again, it's the same mechanism. When you have a nuclear family, you have to cooperate outside your family because you move outside your family very early. So for sure, it's better to observe a high general trust and all other aspects of human cooperations. That's right. That's right.
I think that the evidence lending lending credence to the EPM is quite potent, but there are some fierce critics of the EPM, like Dennison and Ogilvy. What do you think about their research and data?
Yeah, the stress correctly that in Western Europe you have many areas in which you do not have the nuclear family, and we fully agree on that because we study a place in France which is a STEM family area, and Germanic areas are also characterized by the STEM family. So that's the first correct point, the stress. The second point they put online was the fact that you do not observe a correlation between a late female age at marriage and an economic development. But here, it's actually fully consistent with a definition of the European marriage pattern, in which the female age at marriage is not a fixed characteristic, but only dependent on the economic conditions. So it's what we can expect that if you have bad economic conditions, you have a late female age at marriage, and the opposite, if the economic conditions, you will observe an early marriage for women, but it's not inconsistent with this idea of European marriage pattern. It's just the fact that it's not a fixed characteristic, but it's dependent on economic conditions. And we try to show that in this paper to improve the understanding of this European marriage pattern.
The European marriage pattern is contingent on culture and economic conditions, as you rightly noted. So, for instance, a later age of marriage in China may not have made a big difference because of clan structures.
I'm sorry, I was not able to hear you.
Okay, so I'll just repeat myself. I'm
Yeah,
saying that the European marriage pattern is contingent on culture and economics. So, for instance, in China, the EPM might not have made a difference because of kinship groups.
yeah, indeed. You have this European marriage pattern only when you have a nuclear or STEM family. Uh, it's the case in Western Europe, in most of the part of Western Europe, and also probably in Japan and Korea. But when you have a communitarian family, like in China or in Russia or in the Arab world, uh, you do not have this effect because you have to, you don't have to obtain the resource before to marry, because the large family group can provide you what you need to marry. So you do not have this effect of the adjustment of female age at marriage and so on. So indeed, in China or in other areas characterized by the communitarian family, you do not have a European marriage pattern. You have other effect of these family models, but it's a different effect. Yeah.
Now we can talk about your paper, Family Characteristics and Economic Development. I'm assuming that previous in the conversation, you were making a reference to it, but you didn't state the name of the paper. But just tell us about your findings.
Yeah. The previous paper was really a focus on a specific place and studying in details the effect of this of a particular family model, which was the STEM family. And in this second paper you mentioned, it's a big picture of the same thing. Is the idea that each family models has specific consequences on propensity to invest, and as a result on economic development. The basic idea here is that when you have high women status, you have high propensity to invest in human capital because of the role played by the mother in the education of the next generation. Another effect is when you have a strong authority of parents. So this is the case in the STEM family models and also in communitarian family models, but not in nuclear families. You have also this high investment in human capital. And third effect is this characteristic of equality or not among children. And if you accept inequality among children, it will help you to invest in physical capital because you can maintain a critical size to invest, and because you can invest in optimal ways, because you don't have to keep in mind this idea to divide equally your wealth at your days. So you can support, for instance, the project of one child, or you can invest in asset difficult to divide. So I studied these three characteristics in I'm sorry, I have to open. So I have to I study these characteristics across countries, and do observe the predicted effect on investment in physical and human capital, and the resulting effect on economic development.
David,
Yeah.
let me explain a simple point to you. So I take this show seriously, and I am
Sorry.
always Are you unable to hear me?
Yeah.
Well, let me continue. So I'm going to make a simple point. I take this show seriously and I respect my guests, but at the same time feel comfortable when you're speaking. So I do my shows in an office or sometime or at another time at home. And if you're at home, people may make noise, or you may need to go and pay the pizza man. So I really don't have a problem with noise in the background.
No, sorry. I try to manage to be alone at home, but I have four kids, and
Yes,
one of them was just there.
running. I
But
just saw that a little boy running past. Not a problem. Yeah, I don't take it that seriously.
No, it's
Yeah.
okay for me now.
Yeah, the little kid just enjoying himself.
Yeah,
But I'm going to ask this question now. Inequality among siblings favors investment in physical capital. Why?
yeah,
Please explain.
yeah. The first reason is because you can maintain a critical size of wealth across generations. While if you divide equally your wealth at each generation, the risk is to have wealth not big enough to allow you to invest. So that's the first reason. And the second reason is in terms of choice of investment. If you want to be sure that you will be able to share equally your assets at your death, you have to invest in assets easy to share or to different similar assets. While if you accept inequality, it's better because you can just choose the best opportunities to invest in, and the resulting effect is to have a better and a higher investment in physical capital.
David, inheritance laws, this is a bit of a stretch, but in medieval Europe, it was acceptable to disinherit your children. So I'm wondering, do laws play a role in human capital formation? If you are aware that your parents can disinherit you from the family estate, are you going to be motivated to work hard?
Uh, uh, Actually, it's not really true that it was so easy to disinherit someone during the medieval period. It
I
did.
mentioned England, sorry, specifically
Yeah,
England.
in England, in England, that's correct. In England, you have this freedom to test, and it was easy to favor one child at the expense of the other. But in other areas, like in northern France, it was much more difficult. The customs of inheritance was to respect a strict equality between all siblings, boys and girls. Uh, it's that's a difference between England and Northern France. In the two cases, you have a nuclear family in the sense that childs move out quickly after reaching adulthood. But in England, you accept inequality, while in Northern France, you have to respect a perfect equality. It's probably why in France, after the revolution, the slogan was liberty and equality. In other places, like in southern France, it's not so clear because the Roman law clearly explains that you have to practice an equal inheritance, but in the same time you have this freedom to test also in the Roman law. So you observe sometime
Yeah, you may go ahead, David. Uh,
will
Hello,
favor only one heir.
David. For a minute, you were muted, so just repeat what you were saying.
Oh, I'm sorry for the
Yeah.
connection. Uh, yeah, I mentioned that in some areas, like the Germanic areas, you have to practice inequality because you have to transmit the main asset, the farm or the craft shop, to one single heir. So in this case, you do have inequality. While I probably should mention, you probably heard that, but in northern France, you have to practice in the customs. It's clearly mentioned that you have to practice a full equality. So you don't have the same practices and the same rules across Europe early on.
It's just like the case of primogeniture. the when primogeniture is instituted, that promotes human capital formation. So John Brown inherits $1 million and he can reap more wealth. Whereas when there's no primogeniture, wealth is dissipated over time because too many heirs are sharing in the wealth. Are you?
Yeah,
You seem okay. You seem to be quite passionate about this stuff. Just you shaking, nodding your head.
and what is probably the story of primogeniture? It's probably introduced by the Normans in Western Europe, because before the Normans, the kingdoms under the co-religions were divided among sons, at least. While after the Norman conquest, you observe that you have a spread of the primogeniture, at least for nobles, and that's right. It was not better for human capital, but for physical capital. It was clearly better for physical capital, and it's maybe an explanation of the military success because of the Normans, and because you can maintain this high level of wealth to allow you to invest in military equipment and so on.
Now, David, we're getting to the paper that you have been waiting to discuss. Distance to innovations, kinship intensity, and psychological traits. And I really like it.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's here again. It's a big picture, and the idea is that the fundamental cause is this are these family models, these family characteristics, and so up to now, I mentioned that in Europe and in other places, you observe different kinds of family models, and there is a framework to explain these differences, introduced by a French social scientist, Emmanuel Todd, that explains that the primitive family was the nuclear one, and everywhere you observe the early in the past a nuclear family, like you observe that in hunters, gatherers populations. And then you have several innovations in family organizations that gradually increase the complexity. So the first innovation is the STEM family, in which one child remains at the parental home. The second innovation is communitarian family, in which all sons can remain at the parental home. And a last innovation will be the Arab marriage, in which all sons can marry and remain at the parental home, but they have to marry a relative and, if possible, a cousin.
Yes, and
That
yeah, and yeah,
creates an effect of an explanation of the differences you observe in the family models, because if you are close to the innovation centers, you will have more complex families, because you will have received more innovations. And these family centers, these centers of innovations, are exactly the same that for other important innovations, which are agriculture or writings or statehood and so on. And it's for Eurasia, it's the Fertile Crescent and the Central China. So if you accept this framework, you can predict the kinship intensity across populations and the resulting effect on psychological outcomes. And what we do in this paper is that we use wonderful data collected by Schultz and Rich and co-authors in this paper. They explain that the kinship intensity you observe depends on the exposure to the church, to the Catholic Church, and to the Catholic Church family program. While in our framework, the Catholic family program is not the fundamental cause, but just a formalization of what was practiced by the population in Western Europe. And we test two alternative explanations, and it appears that this idea that fundamental cause is this complexity of the family models that depends on the proximities to the centers of innovations is better than the church exposure.
Yes, but you also find commonalities with Joseph Henrich. But what I really appreciate about this paper is that it argues that monogamy predates the right of the Catholic Church.
Yeah, as an evidence for framework is the fact that before the Catholic Church, you already observe the same family models in Western Europe, and actually we have a lot of evidence for that studying the Roman world. If you study Roman law, it's clear that the family was already nuclear. Or STEM, but probably more nuclear. If you study
Greece, if you
the
even go back to the Greeks.
yeah, and maybe to the Greeks, but it's less clear, and you probably have already an increase in the kinship intensity in the early in Greece and even in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. But what is clear is that in the western part of the Roman Empire, you have very early, during the Roman time, a nuclear family, no cousin marriage. You have Saint Augustine that explain clearly that cousin marriage
Yes.
is disgusting. You have studies that found that if you look at what is written on tombs, you have only mention of nuclear family members, and it's very frequent to have mentions of a member of an extended family. So clearly there is a lot of evidence supporting that family in Western Europe was nuclear before the Catholic Church.
The deep roots of Western development. What a topic.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
what is surprising with this framework is that the family model you observe in Western Europe is actually the most primitive one, and it because it was less exposed to this innovation from the Fertile Crescent and China, and paradoxically, it happens to be the better one for
The
modern
most
economic
advanced,
development.
yes, it is monogamy and the nuclear family are advantages for economic development. There's a book written by a distinguished academic. His name is John Vitt. I don't Witte. I don't know if his last name is German, so I don't know if it's Witt or Vitt. I believe it could be Vitt, but John Vitt has done quite a bit of work on monogamy.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of John Vitt. Eventually, I would love to have him as a guest on the show. So,
yeah,
David, yesterday I interviewed Christos Makridis, and I was really passionate about the interview, but we spoke for over 30 minutes. For a long time, I've been saying I want to do shorter interviews. So we have been speaking for around 40 minutes. So I'm going to wrap up. People like shorter interviews, and you can
yeah.
post them on Instagram and other places. But it was a pleasure to speak to you, David. Bye.
Bye. Thanks a lot.